polarization just keeps getting worse in Washington. It's as bad as they've ever seen it, and it seems to be making Americans very upset.
And page 45.
This is politics.
And page 45.
Is this where we want to set the bar for future presidents?
Clinton was the worst in history.
It was a vote along party lines that made President Clinton only the
I'm not for gay marriage.
I believe marriage is between a man and a woman.
Marriage is between a man and a woman. And so does John.
Obama nor I support redefining what constitutes
limousine was set on fire downtown.
It's my decision.
Could be seen
it's not a baby.
And protesters hurled
The U.S. Navy has confirmed the existence of
What's up, everybody, and welcome back to Bob and Weave. This is episode number 6, where myself and co-host Mr. Zach Weaver,
that's me,
we are going to cover the case of Jeffrey Epstein, which is a very complex case with a whole lot of layers. I mean, we could do a full episode just on his death.
Yeah, it's complex. It's twisting and turning. It doesn't seem to stop.
So this may end up being 2 episodes. We'll see. We've got about an hour to sit down this week, and if we don't get through everything, then we'll come back to it next week again.
Works for me.
Because I do want to get into. So I guess let's start. And Zach has done the lead on the research this week. So kind of start with his death, and there's a big conspiracy surrounding his death. So let's talk a little bit about that, and then we'll talk about why there's a conspiracy, and we'll kind of go back to the beginning from there.
So on August 10th of 2019, so this past August, at about 6:30 in the morning, the guards found him in what they presumed to be apparent suicide in his cell, as they were bringing breakfast around to all the inmates.
Right, and to be clear, so for those of you that don't have any idea, Jeffrey Epstein was a convicted sex offender, and he was awaiting trial at the time for some very serious federal charges.
So that's leading up to his death. That's what we know. We know for a fact that that's when he was found. They tried to resuscitate him. They transported to a hospital with no avail, and he was pronounced dead on August 10th.
Right, and right away there was speculation.
Yeah, right away.
Because Jeffrey Epstein he was on suicide watch just 6 days before or 7 days before?
So he was put on 3 weeks before.
Okay.
He was put on suicide watch, and about 6 days before this is when he was
taken off.
Right.
And so that was 3 weeks before he was found unconscious in his cell. His cellmate had alerted the guards that something had happened.
And they, again, all speculation. They don't know whether it was a suicide attempt, whether he was attacked, and really
he said he was attacked.
And the cellmate is not saying anything.
Right. Yeah, and so to be clear, he was found as though he had tried to hang himself with the sheets in his cell.
And with that being said, too, his cellmate is a former police officer who was serving time for 4 counts of murder.
Right.
So it's definitely not saying he couldn't do this.
Right. And so it was deemed an attempted suicide. He was put on suicide watch, but it was Epstein's lawyers that argued to get him off of suicide watch. Because when you're on suicide watch, you're in a room where the lights never get turned off. You're surveilled 24 hours a day, 7 days a week. They're given no sheets. Even the clothing they're given is this really thick stuff that can't be tied. Basically, there's nothing in there that would allow you to be able to hang yourself.
And another strange thing about this whole thing is up until August 8th, in that cell, he had a cellmate.
Right.
I apologize. Up until August 9th, he had a cellmate.
The day before.
And he was moved out on August 9th.
Right. So you have this picture right now, and we'll get into now why there would even be a conspiracy, why a man would be murdered in a federal prison. But real quick on the surface, he's on suicide watch. It's supposed to be a suicide. He claims that he was attacked by his cellmate, that he did not try to commit suicide.
Yeah.
He petitions to get off suicide watch. In the meantime, he's trying to get bail, and he has his lawyer. He's meeting with his lawyers constantly. He's paying lawyers to come in every day just to meet with him so he doesn't have to be in his cell.
Yeah.
So he's just having all these meetings with lawyers. He's still convinced that he's going to get bail. And then all of a sudden, the day before, his cellmate is moved out. All the surveillance footage, cameras that are supposed to be recording what's going on in and around that cell happen to malfunction that night.
Mm-hmm.
The guards are supposed to do rounds every 30 minutes. 2 different guards who were just charged when we're recording this on Wednesday the 20th. On the 19th, were just charged with crimes for falsifying documents.
Yep, for failing to check on him and falsifying documents. And there is camera footage that they say exists from outside the tier. And they say that no one enters the tier from 10:38 at night, 10:30 p to 6:30 a. So from 10:30 at night till 6:30 in the morning, when they are supposed to be going in and out checking on them, nobody does.
Right. Which seems unlikely because they're saying it was just like a 3-hour period or something. They didn't check on him.
Mm-hmm.
And was that the video where they said that it was unusable? Like
I believe so.
There was something wrong with it, and they couldn't really, they used that as evidence that look, nobody went in to kill him.
Mm-hmm.
But then they said whatever's on that footage is unusable. Well,
Yeah.
which makes me wonder if it was tampered with. But so these are the circumstances around his death. Cellmate moved out. Cameras don't work.
Mm-hmm.
Two guards say they fall asleep and forget to check on him,
Mm-hmm.
and then in the morning he's dead in his cell. And then there's some new evidence that's come out about that we'll get to as we come circle back around to that. But I mean, that is a situation that is ripe for conspiracy theory.
Oh, absolutely.
Mm-hmm. So this is Jeffrey Epstein. A little bit about him. Epstein was he was from humble beginnings. I think one of his parents was a teacher. I don't remember what the other one did,
And he started out as a teacher.
Right. Well, and that's the thing. So he's a college dropout, but then he somehow gets this job. Well, what's known about him, I personally believe, after listening to some Jim Clemente Real Crime Profile talk about him, and I've gone through some of the stuff that was called the psychopathy checklist.
Okay.
It's this 20-point checklist to see, is somebody a psychopath? And he checks just about every box.
I could see that.
Yeah. And one of those things, when you have somebody who is a sociopath or a psychopath, they are extremely manipulative. They are outgoing. They're personable. They know how to manipulate other people. And he used that kind of charm. There was usually, think of Ted Bundy, psychopath. He gets this job teaching at was it called the Dalton School?
I think that's what it was.
It's an extremely it's a school in New York for very high class. The richest of the rich send their kids there, and apparently he was very skilled in like math and physics. So he gets his job there. Remember, he's a college dropout, so he has no history teaching, or no experience teaching. He doesn't have a degree, but he gets this job there. And that is where his reign of terror kind of begins, I think. Without getting too deeply into the weeds, he first came onto the police's radar in, I think, 2005.
Okay.
And that was now was the Dalton School in New York or down in, because he was in Palm Beach where he got.
Yeah, so the school was in New York, but
Okay.
the school is way past that, or way before that, because he turned into an investment banker for a company and then eventually started his own firm,
Right.
which was called J. Epstein and Co.
Right. Which was all bullshit, it sounds like.
Yeah, and even there was stated several times that he only dealt with people that assets were worth $1 billion or more.
He advertised that, yeah. And so this is a guy that, by the way, he has no financial background. I mean, so you talk about somebody that's able to really manipulate people and a system. So Epstein, he meets up with, and I believe his first big client where he made his millions was with a guy named Leslie Wexner.
Okay.
Les Wexner is the owner of Victoria's Secrets, I think The Limited, a series of these big chain stores, and somehow. And I believe, and it's believed, that it was through the use of trafficking young, underage women for sexual favors is how Jeffrey Epstein kind of rose to power.
Okay.
That was his currency.
Yeah.
So he's got this mansion down in Palm Beach, and it started, there was a young girl, that he was very selective about his victims, which oftentimes people that are prolific in these horrible crimes are. He would look for young girls that had troubled pasts. So maybe like some of them had had trouble with drugs, some of them had been homeless. Basically, they didn't have a solid home life, and girls that needed money. And then he had another female with him that he would use to go kind of recruit these girls. And he would get these young, anywhere from 12, 13, 14, 16 years old, and tell them, hey, I've got a way you can come. And it was one of the students at a school in Palm Beach, right? This one, where it started. And he would say, tell her, I'll give this girl $200 to come to my mansion. And they would come to the mansion, and they would walk in, and he had, he would have like on the walls photographs of nude underage girls next to photographs of him with people in very high places. Yeah. Former presidents of the United States, governors, actors, things like that.
So the way that it sounded to me is when I was doing a bunch of research is it sounded like he would offer these girls money to just come and talk with him. Right. And that's how it would start is he would have a couple sessions of just sitting down and talking with these girls, and he'd give them a couple $100 afterwards. Right. And then that would evolve into
sex, rape. Yes. Yeah. And that was, I hadn't heard that. I heard maybe that they had lured him in that way. But the one girl, and I don't want to say her name, but because a young underage girl, but she, like in her first trip there, she got there and said it was for a massage. He strips naked and then tells her to get naked. And this is an underage girl, tells her to get naked and start massaging him. And then the massage leads to more than a massage, ends up leading to sex, and then pays her and then makes her feel that, she's going to be in trouble if she doesn't continue to come back or if she tells anyone, and uses her then to get other girls to come back. So that she would find these other girls, and Epstein's quote was, as disgusting as it is, was, the younger the better. And he would get these young girls to recruit other girls for him, which turned into this one girl. Then when she goes back to school, it turns into a fight. This is how he gets caught the first time. There's a fight at the school because, rumors were running around that she was going up and getting paid by this rich millionaire to have sex with him. And somebody's calling her a whore, and they get into this fight. And then one girl tells on another girl. Principal finds $300 in her backpack that had come from Jeffrey Epstein. So that's how charges initially get filed against him. And he gets arrested. And so now this is a big deal. There are without getting into all the weeds on all this stuff, but there are multiple accounts or charges against Epstein for which, and let's be clear about this, any underage girl he's with, whatever, it's rape. You can call it sexual assault. You can call it, solicitation, whatever it is. It's not. It's rape. An underage person, male or female, cannot legally consent to anything. So he's raping these young girls and bringing them in, and then what it doesn't get brought up then, at least on the surface, back in 2005, is that is his currency. There's speculation. I don't know if it's true or not, but that's how he gets tied in with this Leslie Wexner from Victoria's Secret. Is he brings these very rich and powerful people in and says, I have these, I can provide you with 14-year-old girls to have sex with. And these disgusting men are doing this, and now he's got them.
Well, and what's come out later down the road too is they say that his house in Palm Beach and his house in the Virgin Islands were completely wired for video. So that he had video of all of this. Right. For blackmail. So not only could he bring these people in, but then he had power over them at that point. He could keep these individuals in his corner to kind of keep rising his power.
Yeah, and it's crazy. The fact that this man built the wealth that he had is insane because he didn't do anything. He was managing. That was really his only client, was this Les Wexner, managing his money, and he made millions and millions and millions of dollars off of Les Wexner. So then he's providing these young girls. He's got money, so he's buying his way into these circles, these places that are, $100,000 a plate dinners with princes and presidents and governors and all these people. He's getting back into the mix with these people. And so it's just this kind of facade of this rich and powerful man that it's like a self-fulfilling prophecy.
Yeah.
That he becomes this rich and powerful man. And it all could have been stopped from the 2005 case when he's charged.
Yeah.
So he's arrested and charged. He could have spent the rest of his life in prison.
Oh, he absolutely could have. And what it sounds like at first they were just going to let him go. They weren't going to give him anything,
right,
whatsoever.
And it finally gets turned over to the local prosecuting attorney. Now, keep in mind, again, lots of details we're not digging into right here, but he's donating hundreds of thousands of dollars to the police department, to the district attorney's office. He's creating charities that are funding, all these schools and police and prosecutors. All this, he's basically buying his freedom. And he's always been able to do that. Well, when he's in Florida, it then gets turned over into the Fed. Somebody reports, I think it was either the sheriff or I think the DA wasn't going to press the charges. So the police chief or sheriff then turns it to like complains to the Department of Justice.
Yeah.
About what's happening because, like you said, they were just going to let him go. And I mean, again, this man is raping little girls.
I saw a quote at some point that said that they were basically going to treat it like a jaywalking ticket. Just fine him and let him go.
Right. Well, and that's how he wanted it looked at even after he was convicted. But so what happens is, so then it gets turned over to a name that a lot of you are probably very familiar with, Alex Acosta, who at the time was the state's attorney, or excuse me, the federal U.S. attorney for the state of Florida. The reason you probably know him is because he was later appointed as President Trump's labor secretary. And what's crazy, so little aside here, we've watched every single cabinet appointment from Trump, whether it's cabinet or judge, and how the other side has just really raked them over the coals for every little thing. Alex Acosta, after I'm going to tell you the story of what he just did, was brought up. One of the congressmen brought this up in his hearing for a second, asking about his relationship with Jeffrey Epstein and if his decision to not prosecute him or prosecute him in the way that he did was agreed upon by everyone in his office. He says, it was pretty much that's what we wanted to do. It's the only time it's ever mentioned he gets confirmed.
That's fucking crazy to me.
Well, and the more and more we're looking at this, I think there's a reason for it. The guy that should have been raked over the coals, that's all they ask him, and then they move on. So this is what happened. It gets turned over to the U.S. Attorney's Office, Alex Acosta. Acosta makes him this ridiculous sweetheart deal where he drops the charges down and takes the felonies away and drops it down to 2 charges that are basically like if somebody solicited it was like solicitation of a prostitute and solicitation of a minor process, something like
that. Yeah, it was super lenient what he got.
Yeah, so he took this. I mean, again, raped multiple underage girls, and he gets these 2 solicitation charges, which amount to an 18-month jail sentence.
Yeah,
and he was facing life.
Which out of the 18 months, he served 3 months there. And then after that, he served a total of 13 months of this 18 months.
Right.
He served 3 months, and after 3 months, they allowed him a work release.
Right.
And he was allowed to go for 12 hours a day, 6 days a week to his office.
And his house, and to his mansion.
Yeah, just out.
Yeah, and as it turned out, he was raping women during that time.
So he had to actually pay. He had to pay for a police presence, which he required them to wear suits. So he basically paid for a police presence to be security over him. But he paid for them, and they stood outside, and they welcomed these girls, and they kept a guest log, which they then destroyed after all of this. They said because the time frame had elapsed, which is absolutely asinine to me.
It's bullshit. And and this is what money and power was by. This is how he was manipulating this system. So he gets put in jail for 18 months, which is already completely unprecedented.
Yeah.
For a man that's facing life in prison. Imagine the victims. Also, Acosta didn't make contact with the victims at all.
That's fucking crazy.
Before making the deal with him, which is illegal, if I understand correctly. The victims have to be made aware of the deal. The press wasn't made aware. They did everything they could do to protect him, to sneak this little sweetheart deal in there. And then when he gets to the prison, the sheriff's name was Rick Bradshaw. He's the one that approved the work release, which, first of all, it's bullshit. He doesn't work. He created a bullshit charity organization that he just had to be out and running or it would just completely crumple.
Yeah.
So they allowed him, like you said, 12 hours. He basically slept in jail. He got to get up in the morning and take private cars, a chauffeur pick him up, and then what essentially became his own paid-for private security to follow him to this office, back to his mansion, where they're bringing in more little girls, and he's raping more girls while he's in prison. And it was this Bradshaw just let him do it. And apparently there's very clear laws and policies within their organization that says that any sex offender cannot do work release, period. It's not allowed.
Yeah.
And so that's it. I mean, it's slap on the wrist doesn't even describe it. 13 months of that time, for 10 of those months, he spent most of his time at home and just slept in the prison, and they gave him full access to the law library. He basically never had to be in a cell while he was there. So again, this conspiracy with his death, like this is how much power the man has. A U.S. attorney, when it's turned over to the Department of Justice, is the one that negotiates the deal to give him this 18-month BS sentence. And then a county sheriff lets him go home and rape girls while he's supposed to be in jail.
Yeah.
It's insane. Now, I did hear, listening to Jim Clemente, he actually made a good point about because he's baffled, right? Because Jim worked for the DOJ. He worked for the FBI. And he was also a prosecutor. And he said, you don't give deals like this unless you have, they're providing information about other people to begin with. And he said, so his theory was obviously that, maybe he was providing information about, because all the co-conspirators, it was well known back then that some very rich and powerful people were coming in and having sex with these women, with these girls.
Or at least tied to him at this point.
Right. And so like maybe they make a deal with him if he gives them his black book of all these names. But Jim said a theory of his, and it makes sense, is there could be, the only reason he could see a deal like that where it's just pushed through and breaks all the rules is if there's a national security threat. And then all those rules don't mean squat at that point, which didn't make much sense to me. But then it comes out that there's potential that Epstein had some connection to like Mossad, Israeli special forces, and there's also some former presidents of the United States. I mean, at one point he's flying President Clinton around
the world.
Around the world in his
I think
private
they had
jet.
3 different continents they stopped at on his private jet.
Yep, running through Africa with him, the president.
Yeah.
His private jet, by the way, that was coined Lolita, because it was known that he was taking young girls up on the plane, crossing federal waters, and raping these girls across the world.
Yeah.
That President Clinton was riding around in. Another point, when President Clinton was asked about that, I believe he said he'd been in that plane or been with him twice because that trip was publicized.
Yeah.
But flight logs show that President Clinton was in Epstein's plane with him. I've heard everything from 26 to 28 times.
Okay. Yeah, the record I saw was 27, so I mean that falls in exactly what you said.
I heard 27. Mike showed me an article yesterday that said 28, and then I heard somewhere else today where it was 26. But anyway, more than 2.
Yeah. That
President Bill Clinton is flying around this rape plane is what it is. Yeah. Who knows what's happening in there, but obviously Clinton is lying about how many times he'd been in it.
Well, and I think you're exactly right. You talk about him saying that it's a threat to national security, and we'll get into this. Maybe we'll get into this in a little bit, but I mean, that's exactly it. The possibility of this getting out could really crumple the whole government.
Right.
I mean, just absolutely destroy everything that we know.
Right. Well, and beyond, I mean, so just some of the names that a later victim, the one that kind of brought things out when he was in jail this last time when he died, Virginia Guffrey. Some of the names she's accused that she was forced to have sex with were the British Prince Prince Andrew was one of them, and there's photos of her at Epstein's mansion with a bare midriff with Prince Andrew with his arm around her, and there's pictures of the prince and Epstein together, and the British newspapers said the headline said the prince and the pedophile. But here in the States, New Mexico governor at the time, Bill Richardson, was one of the people she said that she was forced to have sex with. Big financier Glenn Dubin, and Senator George Mitchell. I mean, so that's just to name a few. These are people. These are high up people in our government.
Yeah.
And then Clinton. I don't think she accused Clinton, but Clinton, we know for a fact, was with Epstein and was traveling on his plane. We don't know what he was doing. Current president Trump has ties to him. I don't think anything recent, or I don't think there's been any accusations that he's been either on the plane or he's with the girls, but he was friends with Epstein. There's all kind of pictures of him with Epstein. He's quoted years ago saying that he thinks Epstein's a great, terrific guy. So the fact that it could be a national security risk, I think, is legit.
I think it really is.
But I don't think that's the way it gets handled.
No, I definitely don't think it's the way it gets handled. And there's more to this. So he had residence in New York as well.
Right.
And New York made him file as a class 3 sex offender, which is the highest level.
Right.
They require them to check in every 90 days, which they never checked on him once.
And he never checked in.
Never checked
Not once.
And a non-compliance there is a felony. I mean, as it is anywhere, but a non-compliance is a felony.
Right.
So they never checked on him once.
Right.
He never checked in, and they just let him go.
Yeah. And so keep in mind this level of arrogance. He thinks rightly so, he's above the law.
Yeah.
I mean, he continued to do this even while he was locked up. He never checked in, like he was supposed to with in New York as a registered sex offender. When asked about it to reporters, he would say, "Oh, I'm not a predator. I'm an offender. There's a difference."
Yeah.
And I think that's where that line came from. He said, "For me, it's kind of the same thing. It's like calling somebody a murderer who just stole a bagel."
Yeah.
Or it was some kind of quote like that came from him.
Ugh.
Like it's just no big deal.
Yeah.
But so this is what's going on with Epstein. So then he's out. What was that? 2008, I think, is when he actually got locked up for those 18 months. Is that right?
I read it as 2005. It was when the charges came in. I guess I didn't read. I should have done a little better reresearch on this. I guess I didn't read the actual date.
I got it right here. The plea deal was 2008 on the 2005 charges.
Okay.
Yep. So then, in 18 months later, 2009, he's out. Then you've got 10 years of terror. So he's got this mansion. Is it Mar-a-Lago? Is that how you pronounce it?
Mar-a-Lago was the Trump estate.
Okay, right. But there was some connection to him with that, wasn't there?
Not that I saw. I mean, just him being there, but I mean, there very well could be.
Maybe that's where he was seen with Trump. Yeah.
There's so many little rabbit holes in this whole thing that just get crazy. But I know that's where he was spotted, was the Mar-a-Lago, which is a Trump residence or a Trump property. So there's something with that, and I know he was spotted there with Trump.
Right.
The big property is are you talking about the one in the Virgin Islands?
Well, there's the one of the Virgin Islands that was just, what was their nickname for that?
Well, they called it Pedo Island. They called
Island, yeah.
Yeah, they called it Orgy Island. They called it Island of Sin.
Right.
It was called Little St. James, but they like to call it Little St. Jeff.
Right.
So,
yeah, and that's the one where he had a mansion on that private island in the Virgin Islands, and that's where he would, these girls, this Virginia Guffrey, who is, a brave woman for bringing this out, because I mean, she'd have to be terrified for her life. Says that Epstein and Ghislaine Maxwell, who was the woman that was working with him, that was bringing these girls in and assaulting these women with Epstein, that was kind of his hand. She was handling the girls.
Yeah,
for
she
him.
was his madam.
Right. They would take these. They would fly all these young girls to this mansion into pedo mansion or whatever. All these different nicknames they had at Orgy Island. And they would lock them up in this mansion and wouldn't let them leave.
Yeah, they would take their passports. I mean, there's a lot of reports of them doing that, where they would take these girls there to take their passports and threaten that they couldn't leave.
Right.
They would actually fly them in order to get to the boat, if you didn't helicopter in, or in order to get to the island, if you didn't helicopter in, was a ferry, and the ferry's name was Lady Ghislaine. I mean, it was just all over the place.
Right. And everybody knew, and as Laura Richards said on Real Crime Profile, like, fuck all these people.
Mm-hmm.
Like how many people are complicit in this? Nobody wants to talk about the drivers, the pilot of the plane, the caretakers at the property.
Mm-hmm.
Like, this didn't happen in a vacuum.
Yeah.
Like, there's just people that allowed this to happen this whole time. So they're bringing these young girls to this island, and then he would fly in, and I believe, I mean, you might have it there, correct me if I'm wrong, but I believe there were flight logs of Bill Clinton and Prince Andrew both on multiple occasions flying on Lolita to that island.
Yes, there
to
was.
Orgy Island.
Mm-hmm.
And these are just some. I'm giving some names that you know. There's a lot of people that are very rich finance people. There are people in government, but those are some big ones that he's locking all these people up. Well, finally, this victim, Virginia Guffrey, she comes forward and she spills the beans, and Jeffrey Epstein is finally arrested in, was it 2018?
2008. That doesn't sound right. 2018. Well, the big arrest was 2019.
It was just this year.
Yeah, it was July of 2019.
Okay.
I believe it came to a head before that, but the actual arrest was July of 2019.
Right. And there was like a simultaneously they arrested him and were kicking the door down to his mansion
Mm-hmm.
at the same time. And it was, I mean, he was done. And a lot of people were done because, I mean, because there's all the video evidence, photos, CDs. I mean, he documented his abuse.
Mm-hmm. They said there was hundreds, if not thousands, of photos of underage, nude photos of underage women.
Right.
On top of these videos that they had that were supposedly labeled.
Right.
With not only the girl's name, but whoever was in the video with them.
Right.
So he had the blackmail on everybody.
Right. And so think about this when we talk about national security or what the hell is going on right now. That was the FBI.
Mm-hmm.
So the FBI has information right now as we're speaking on who all was participating in this trafficking ring.
Mm-hmm.
And they're saying it's potentially the biggest one in the most prolific sex trafficking ring
Mm-hmm.
in the history of the world. I mean, it spanned continents.
Yeah, it absolutely. I mean, it must.
Mm-hmm.
At this point, it must.
Right. And as you said, so when Epstein had this, you know, he starts working with this Les Wexner, and that's where he builds his millions. He goes to jail. Somehow, there was a financial firm he worked for
Mm-hmm.
that somehow there was like some major SEC violations that happened there, and Epstein bought himself out of that.
Yeah, he's done so far.
Yeah, he was a partner, and the SEC comes in and shuts him down and sends one partner to prison.
Mm-hmm.
And I've heard him speak, and he's like, there was no question they were doing whatever it was they were doing.
Yeah.
But he's like, how the hell did they never even bothered him?
Yeah.
And he was complicit in all of it.
And he's bought his way out of everything.
Right.
I think I've seen, I don't remember the exact number, but I want to say that there are over 20 out-of-court settlements with victims.
Mm-hmm.
And this is before all of this. This is from 2005 till 2019.
Just pays them some money and
they go away.
Right.
You know, and they probably sign a non-disclosure agreement.
Yep.
Which is the same thing. Like all the R. Kelly victims that he's paid off, they all sign non-disclosure non-disclosure agreements, so they can't talk about it. So if they talked about it, they'd have to give the money back.
They'd have to give the money back, right?
Which, you know, you'd think they would want to, but by that point they've probably spent the money, so they can't.
Right.
Now he can sue them for you know what I mean? He can sue them back.
Right.
Even though he did this, he can still sue them because of this agreement, which is fucking asinine to me.
The whole thing is sickening. I mean, and you see how this builds. You take a guy that's already absolutely a narcissist, absolutely a sociopath. I believe he's a psychopath.
Oh, absolutely.
And then you feed into that, right? So a psychopath already has this feeling of power, right? So they feel like the entire world is revolving around them. Is a very simplistic view. They don't care about your feelings or emotions or anyone. They only care about themselves. But they also have this self-image that they're invincible. Well, then as he's marching through, you know, a lot of times they get knocked down. They end up in jail. Everybody tells them to go fuck themselves at some point along their lives.
Yeah, and for him, everything he's done is fueled to be true.
Right.
I mean, it just keeps fueling that fire of everything he does. He can just buy his way out of. He's bigger than everything.
And so he's getting cocky. I mean, he's just doing. I mean, like I said, this isn't happening in a vacuum. He's hiding in plain sight.
Yeah.
You know, the people you should be worried about, people in government, people in power that are going to find out you're doing this, he's inviting them over. You know, he's sitting next to Woody Allen at a dinner, you know, and then, oh, by the way, guess what I got?
Yeah, I've seen lists of names that he's attached to. That doesn't mean it had anything to do with it, but he's attached to everybody.
Yeah, Elon Musk was one of them.
His contacts are ridiculous.
Yeah. And again, that's not everybody necessarily was involved with what he was doing, but they were all, it was no secret. You know, I think anybody, including Donald Trump, including Elon Musk, I mean, I don't believe they don't know who they were hanging out with, but he had such power and influence that they just let it slide, you know, which is the good old boys club. And fuck that.
They say that there is a list of names, that there's hundreds of names on this list that if got out would just destroy everything.
Right.
And they're not even part of the allegations right now. So they say there's hundreds of names left to get out that aren't even out there yet.
And I bet you they don't come on. That's what pisses me off, because they are in the hands of the FBI currently. And that's the scary thing, is like that they would say, like, okay, it's a national security, but are we really saying, hey, if you guys find out that everybody that was raping young girls with Jeff Epstein, our government will collapse? Then let our fucking government collapse.
Absolutely.
You know, fix it. You know, that's what, you know, that is, that I said, like in our first episode, and I said, you know, why do you think this divides here? And I said, you can't say Trump because he's a symptom of it. This is what I mean.
Yeah.
You know, Trump's in my opinion, not talking about policies or anything, as a human being, I personally think Donald Trump is a despicable human being.
Yeah.
Donald Trump is president, also just in my opinion, because the American people are goddamn sick and tired of the people that are in power. They're sick of the politicians. They're sick of shit like this happening.
Yeah, they want that outside force.
Yeah. So the people that are looking like, oh, that everybody's racist that likes Trump, or they're sexist, or this, and some of them are, sure, but I'm sure that's true. But for a large part, I believe the reason he got elected is because the more he acts like a jackass, the more he acts like not a politician, the more people are like, well, fuck, I'd rather have that.
Yeah. Yeah, I 100% agree with you. I think he got elected because he wasn't a politician.
Right.
They're like, fuck the politicians at this point. We need something fresh.
I just don't want anything to do with politicians. Right.
Yeah.
And some of it makes me wonder, like, how calculated he is. I mean, he can't be dumb. He sure as hell comes across as being an idiot every time he opens his mouth, but he can't be dumb.
No.
Which makes me wonder, is like, is it a strategy? You know, when everybody's saying, put your damn phone out, stop tweeting.
Yeah, he just does it more.
If he's just like, I'm going to intentionally keep sounding like a jackass because that's how I got elected. Anyway, that's a whole nother subject. But it plays with this because this, like, if Jim Clemente is right, and Epstein was given that deal because if they prosecuted him and he opened his mouth, it would be a national security risk, which really is just about the only thing that makes any sense how that deal happened. Like that means like the people that are governing us right now, probably, I'm sure, both sides of the aisle are involved in this massive child sex trafficking ring that Jeffrey Epstein had going on. So with that being said,
it's fucking terrifying.
It is terrifying. It's so frustrating because like we feel like we don't have power for shit. Somebody, I dropped in the for those of you that are Truth and Justice listeners, I threw in a little Epstein didn't kill himself in our last episode, which is, you know, it's funny, sure, but it was also because like I don't want people to stop talking about it.
I agree.
Keep it out there, and this person's like, well, you know, instead of just making somebody got mad at me, instead of making smart ass comments, why don't you do something, make them investigate? I'm like, I can't make them do shit.
Yeah.
What can I make them do?
No, you're absolutely right.
What can you make them do? What we can do is keep being loud and keep stomping our fucking feet until somebody does do something.
Yeah.
Because I don't. Well, why don't you start getting into the death before I start getting really fired up and start throwing things.
Well, before I can get into that, talking to a person in my life, and I won't mention who it is. It's honestly the smartest person I know in my entire life.
It was me.
It was not you. Talking to this person, we were discussing it, and he's, you know, we were discussing. He said. He says, I will tell you exactly why this will disappear. He says, because it's too big to get out.
Right.
The scope of it is too big for this to get out. If it got out, you know, again.
I think that's why he's dead, for starters.
100% agree that's why he's dead. And that's exactly it. Is just the scope of this is so large that we can't even fathom what's out there.
Yeah, I agree. Just a little bit that we're thinking might be is scary enough.
Yeah, it really is.
And I'll give you a little clue, people listening at home that don't know. psychopaths, narcissists, sociopaths, you know what they don't do? Kill themselves.
Yeah. Because they can get out of it.
Right. I mean, their whole world is themselves. I mean, it's
Yeah.
not like it never, ever, ever happens, but it's extremely rare, and certainly not in the situation that Epstein was in, where he still thought he was about to get bail because of his warped view of the world.
Mm-hmm.
He was certain he was going to skate out of this just like he always did. Like, that was my first clue, was a guy like that, no way he kills himself.
Yeah.
No way.
So directly after the death, Dr. Barbara Sampson
Mhm.
is the physician that did the autopsy.
Right.
She ruled it a suicide.
Mm-hmm.
She said everything about this rules as a suicide.
Right.
Now, there was another doctor down the road that was hired by the family, Dr. Michael
Baden. Bodden, some people call him. He's a famous doctor. Mike Bodden is actually, he was the when we were talking about the Rodney Reed case, and the doctor that found the lividity evidence,
Mm-hmm.
and the doctor that I quoted that said that this is scientifically impossible for Rodney Reed to have killed him. That was also Dr. Michael Bodden.
Now, he's the one that says it was ruled a homicide.
Right.
And to quote, he said, there's injuries that are extremely unusual with a suicidal hanging, and could more occur commonly in a homicidal strangulation.
Mm-hmm.
Now, there was a particular bone that was broken. I think it's called the hyoid.
There's the hyoid, the cricoid, and the larynx were all fractured.
Now, they say that they can break during a hanging, but it's about 6% of the time.
Right.
Every other case of that is usually homicidal strangulation.
Right. And so for the hyoid bone it's really cartilage, but it's right above your Adam's apple.
Mm-hmm.
And it is, a common sign of strangulation, because when somebody wraps their hands around somebody's throat,
Mm-hmm.
they're pushing with their thumbs in that spot right there, and it usually will crush that cartilage.
Mm-hmm.
So because of where it's at, if you imagine being hung, especially, this isn't somebody on a rope that dropped 20 feet and snapped their neck.
Yeah.
You're talking about a bed sheet on a bunk that's 4 feet high.
Mm-hmm.
So there's not that violent snap. But yeah, it's super duper uncommon, but it would be uncommon if it was just that. But I believe, wasn't there also a fracture to the one side of the larynx and on the other side of the cricoid?
There was, yeah.
And so the cricoid is another piece of cartilage right below the Adam's apple.
Mm-hmm.
And I only know that from years working as a medic, as a fireman. We used to, when you had to intubate somebody and put a tube down their throat, if you were having trouble with it, because it's tricky to get it, you got two tubes there. One goes to the stomach, one goes to the lungs.
Mm-hmm.
You would hold, we'd call it cric pressure. If you push down on that cricoid bone, it would line it up better to get the tube in.
Yeah.
So he's got a fracture on one side of that, other side of the trachea, and then the cricoid bone does it have 2 fractures in it?
I guess I didn't see that.
Oh, there were 3 total.
I think there's
right?
3 total. I guess I didn't see the actual number on that part.
Yeah.
The other thing that, and this is strictly me, I have no understanding of this, I guess. I haven't seen the actual autopsy results or the report or anything like that.
I've only seen the summary. I don't think the report's available.
Typically, everything I've ever seen about hanging, there's typically also other marks. And it doesn't seem like they've reported any of these other marks that evolve in a hanging. Like, so when a person's hung or when they go to hang, even if it's self-inflicted, there is a moment where your body wants to fight.
Right.
And you will actually fight yourself. You'll fight the restriction of the knot. You'll fight. You're pulling on yourself. You're scratching yourself.
They claw their neck. Yeah.
Yeah. And from everything it doesn't sound like there's anything like that.
No. Well, and also Bodden mentioned some marks on the side of the neck too.
Mm-hmm.
Which, like, if I didn't know the case and I was just reading from what I've read about it, and it just sounds like a manual strangulation case.
Yeah.
You got the broken hyoid bone. You got bruises on the side of the neck, both sides. That's someone's hand. Or, these thumbs here are breaking the bones, and the fingers on the outside are bruising the neck. I just don't, remember, if he hung himself, this is a sheet.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, so there's not a wire. He's not dropping 20 feet and snapping.
Mm-hmm.
It's him literally tying a sheet to a bedpost or a bed, and then kind of slouching himself down and that process takes minutes. Like you said, that's why usually at some point your body goes into primate mode.
And you're going to fight yourself.
You start fighting it, right? Which would, in that scenario, you just stand up.
Mm-hmm.
Which, I mean, you can get past that because people do hang themselves in prison sometimes. Yeah. But Michael Bodden, or Baden, I've heard it pronounced both ways, is saying that it looks more. He's not saying it is a homicide, to be clear.
Yeah, he said that these injuries result much more commonly in a homicide.
Right. And I think he said in 50 years of practicing, of doing autopsies, he's never seen a hanging with those kinds of fractures like that. That's that combination of fractures.
Well, I mean, they said, so the report I saw said 6%. So 6%. I mean, that's
6% break the hyoid.
Yeah. That's really, really low.
Right. And he's saying he's never seen one ever because it wasn't just because if it broke the hyoid, that would mean the rope was up here because it's pretty high for a hanging.
Yeah.
It would mean the rope was up here. That's why it doesn't and your hyoid sits back behind, especially in a male, behind the Adam's apple. Not easy to break. And with a rope or a sheet, that weight is distributed. You know, there's nothing putting pressure right there. You know, the weight is distributed around, and that's why it's very, very rare for that to happen. But for it to break here on the hyoid, here on the trachea, and here on the cricoid, like if I understood him right, he was saying he's never seen that ever. You know, he's seen it in strangulation cases because somebody's fighting, but he was asking for, you know, there's a lot of information that we don't have. But did you catch that what was the Emmy's name?
Barbara Sampson.
Barbara Sampson. You know, her response to that was, you know, because he said we need a more in-depth look. Her response was, we did an in-depth look. There's no reason for us to examine this any further.
Yeah.
Like that's another red flag. Like seriously, this high-profile case, there's literally millions of people around the world saying Epstein didn't kill himself on podcasts, and on newscasts and memes, and people are screaming from the rooftops that this man didn't kill himself. And you're like, no, we don't want to look, because their initial report also didn't say suicide. I think it said manner of death, suicide, pending further review or investigation or something.
That sounds
like
right.
that. Yeah, there was something. So it wasn't even determined for sure that it was suicide then. And you would expect, as Baden said, that there should be if he was strangled, there should be skin cells under his fingernails. There should be DNA testing, all that, and no one knows what's happening.
Yeah,
the bed sheet that will have DNA all over it, and it's just kind of like it's sitting. It's so scary because the government that's supposed to be protecting us, the government that is supposed to be investigating this, are the same people that are fucking involved in this.
Yeah.
So it's just like, trust us, we got it.
Yeah.
And just waiting for the news cycle to go away.
Yeah, it just sounds more like they're protecting themselves instead of protecting us. Which is really what it's been. And there are so many, like we talked about earlier, the fact that his cellmate was moved out the day before. So you've removed a witness. You know what I mean? Somebody that could possibly talk. The camera's malfunctioning, which just seems an odd time for a camera. You know, I'm not saying cameras can't malfunction. Clearly, we've had them malfunction here while we're recording.
Right.
But at the time that this happened, you know what I mean? All these little things that just continue to line up.
Right.
It's just ridiculous. These guards that were supposedly sleeping or online shopping that just weren't paying attention. Like all these things that continue to line up when you have the highest profile offender you could have at the moment. You know, this prison that he was at had El Chapo. It had the person that bombed the World Trade Center, the 93 World Trade Center bombing. It held these high profile. They're used to high profile. They check on these people.
Right.
This wasn't the county jail down the road.
Yeah. And there's too many. You know what I'm worried about right now? I'm genuinely concerned about are those two guards.
Yeah.
I highly doubt they live to see a trial.
Yeah. So 2 days ago, yesterday, as we're recording this yesterday, is the two guards, a male and a female. Tova Noel is a female officer, age 31. Michael Thomas, male officer, age 41, were the two guards that were on post. And they were, like you said, we talked about earlier, that they were just taken in charge on this.
Right.
And I agree with you. I'm scared for those people. Like I don't think they'll see trial.
Well, because I mean, it was August 10th he died.
Yes, August 10th. Sorry,
August 10th. So we're in November. So August, September, October, November. So 3 months go by. They weren't going. Tinfoil hat conspiracy theory. Admittedly, okay, this is just speculation. But to me, like, it didn't take 3 months to figure out that these people messed up.
Yeah.
especially with the was it the MCC? Is that the
Yes, the MCC.
Okay, that's the prison officials in the United States. With them investigating, the FBI investigating, with the DOJ right there, they knew. I mean, this is not hard. They had to have figured out in 20 minutes what these guards did.
Yeah,
but they weren't charged. So if we're looking at the tinfoil hat conspiracy, like they were paid by someone, told to stay away, not to go near it or whatever, they obviously assumed they were going to get some money and they weren't going to get charged. But now there's so many eyes on it. All of a sudden now 3 months later, they just get charged. Now, how do you keep those guys? If there is a conspiracy and they were in on it, how do you keep those guys quiet unless it's just out of sheer fear for their lives?
Yeah, that can be it at the moment.
Yeah. I mean, because they now that they're charged, they're going to go to prison. I guarantee they do more fucking prison time than Jeffrey Epstein did for raping those girls in 2005.
Yeah, you're absolutely right. And at this point, who's going to believe them? You know what I mean? Even if they do say something, well, yeah,
me,
you and I will.
Yeah, but
is that going to affect anything in the government? Is anybody in the government?
I think it'll get squashed. I don't think that we will. I don't think that we will hear. It'll be if they give any information. It'll be deemed a national security threat. We won't hear anything about it, and those guys will just disappear to some. They'll drop the Patriot Act on them, which basically gives our government the right to do whatever the hell they want to.
Yeah,
and go cart them off to some concrete box in Minnesota somewhere, and you'll never hear from them again.
And the other thing, just playing the other side, and not playing the other side as far as that, playing the other side of him committing suicide rather than being murdered, is on August 8th, he did sign a will and testament, his last will and testament on August 8th, the day before. Well, so August 8th, he signs this. August 9th, his cellmate is moved. August 10th is when they find him.
Right.
So on August 8th, he signs the last will and testament, and in it, he gives everything away.
Right.
So that's a weird thing to do, to be murdered afterwards. You know what I mean? That's something that aligns more with suicide, is when people start giving away possessions. And that could also lead to these guards not checking on him too, because maybe it was a deal where he's like, listen, I'm going to do this, and I've advised my whoever to give you guys money to not check on me. Right. So they're still
possible too.
They're still implicated for not checking on him, but maybe that's how he got away with killing himself.
And the reason that all this stuff broke down was so that he could kill himself. It's possible. It sounds less tinfoil hatty than somebody coming in and murdering him, but I can't see it. Like I wonder. I just heard bits and pieces about the will thing, but is everyone sure that's legit?
You're absolutely right. That's a hard thing to hear too, because again, it's signed and dated August 8th, but what the hell does that mean?
When did that surface? Was that already known that before he died?
So I want to say that didn't surface until weeks afterwards. I want to say it was 2 or 3 weeks afterwards is when that surfaced.
Hang on, I'm going to look this up right here.
I do believe it was 2 weeks.
Jeffrey Epstein will. So here's an article from the New York Post dated August 19th. So it's 9 days after his death. Jeffrey Epstein signed his will just 2 days before he hanged himself in the Manhattan jail cell, leaving behind a nearly $600 million fortune, according to court papers exclusively obtained by the Post on Monday.
So that was court papers on Monday of that week.
So
still
a week after he's dead.
Yeah.
Put all of his holdings in a trust called it. I don't know. I mean, I'm not gonna be able to go through it all now, but I want to come back to
the way it sounded. It sounded like it was a week later that this came to fruition. You know what I mean? That doesn't mean that it wasn't there, but that it came to everybody's attention was about a week later.
Yeah, and I don't buy it now. I don't buy it.
Yeah.
We'll see. Maybe that's legit. Maybe the will's legit. Maybe the whole thing's legit, but
it seems fishy.
This guy has no more care or feeling or respect for human life than not to abduct, held captive, rape, sell the bodies of teenage girls, And he just decides, you know what? I'm going to do everybody a favor. I'm going to give away my $600 million estate and kill myself so nobody else gets in trouble.
Mm-hmm.
No fucking way. I just don't. It doesn't match with his personality.
Well, and you're 100% right, because even if he kills himself, even if he goes through this, he does not know that they're not going to get in trouble.
Right.
So he's not being a martyr in this. He's not taking in one for the team
Right.
and killing himself so no one else is implicated, because their names are already out there.
Right.
Because after he killed himself or was murdered, depending on which way you feel about it, there was a judge that shut the whole thing down.
Mm-hmm.
He couldn't have known that was going to happen.
Right.
And
talk about that. Talk about the judge shutting it down.
Yeah, which is just, it baffles me too that there was this whole case pending, and then after he's dead, there's a judge out of New York that shuts the whole case down. That says,
since he's dead, charges are dropped.
Yep, we're dropping the charges. We're not going to worry about it.
Mm-hmm.
And seals the file, and that's the end of it.
Right.
We're not supposed to worry about it anymore. None of these victims are supposed to get justice. None of these victims are even supposed to, you know what I mean? It doesn't make any sense to me why this judge would shut this down.
Yeah.
Unless, again, there's higher implications to this whole thing.
Right.
Because how can these victims not get justice? How are they not going to allow these victims to get justice? There's victims out there right now. I understand that he's got out-of-court settlements with 24 women, whatever it may be, but there's so many more. There's hundreds of thousands of photos. Right. That doesn't mean there's hundreds of thousands of women, but there's hundreds and thousands of photos.
Well, that Virginia Guffrey, she spoke after he died and was just, I listened to her last night. I don't remember what thing I was listening to, but I said she was devastated. She's glad that he's dead, but she's like, he escaped justice again.
Yeah.
She and all these other victims didn't get to see this man pay for what he did.
Mm-hmm.
But I don't think that was his choice. I don't think that. He is the type of man, I feel, that would have used the information that he had on all these powerful people as his currency to get himself a lighter sentence.
And you and I sit here talking about this, and at this point, we're merely a voice.
Mm-hmm.
But that's what we have to be, is all of us have to be that. All of us have to be that voice to not let this go away.
Right.
And I think that was your and I's concern with doing this, is we wanted to let people know that we can't let this go away.
Right.
That is huge. Like, we need to continue to talk about this. We need to keep this in everybody's mind so that this doesn't just disappear, and that these victims don't just disappear as well.
Yeah, 100% agree with that. And unless you got anything else, I think that's a good place for us to wrap it up. All right, buddy. Well, thanks everybody for listening. Zach, thanks for being my friend.
Love you, buddy.
All right, love you too, man. We'll see you guys next week.